You are listening to the Better 2 podcast with DM Needom. Hi gang, Donna here. Thanks for tuning into the Better 2 podcast. Today's guest is Alan Lazaros. Alan has an interesting story, and it's kind of a soliloquy story for the fact that his dad, at 28 years old, was in a fatal car accident. Alan was only 2. Alan had some tough times during his childhood, and he had some issues with drinking, but he was sober. And at 26, he ended up having a car accident. That was a huge wake-up call for him, and it made him realize that he needed to get his life under control. And that's exactly what he did. After going through that tragedy of losing his dad and going through his own trials and tribulations about his sobriety, he decided that he needed to do some holistic self-improvement. And he created something called Next Level University. He has a Next Level University podcast. And he also has a whole plan on how to level up your game and how to get rid of the time wasters and feeding the wrong wolves, as he put it. But all that is discussed in the podcast, and we go into a lot of detail. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. And if you want to follow the podcast, you can go to better2podcast.com, and all our social links are there. And you can drop me an email if you want to be a guest or have a question at Donna@thebetter2podcast.com. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Ellen. How are you doing today?
I am very, very well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Your life kind of has a parallel with your father's life. That's kind of where I'm going to just jump right in, because it was kind of fascinating when I was reading that. And I'm a person personally that can look at my life and see how it has unfolded. Events in my past have brought me to lessons in the future and learned how to handle them and understand them better. So when you were 2, your dad died in a car accident, which I'm sorry to hear, but that's kind of what set your life on a certain path, did it not?
For sure.
Did you end up did your mom remarry, or did you end up just having a single mom?
So my mom met my stepdad, and from ages 2 to 14, I had a stepfather.
Okay. So you still had that male influence, but it wasn't necessarily, so were you still in touch with your grandparents from your dad's side and everything?
No, not really. Not until after my stepdad left did we really reconnect with that side of the family.
It must have been pretty traumatic growing up without your dad.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you think
more so for my sister than I, because my sister was 6, okay, and so she knew him very well. And it's one of those things that, and I appreciate how deep we're going so quickly, but my sister knew him really well, and so it was more traumatic for her. But at the same time, for me, I never really got to know him, so that loss is different. And in some ways, I guess better, in other ways worse. But yeah, I think right out of the gate, normal wasn't really normal for me. And I think that's been quite a theme in my life for sure.
I understand what you mean by the differences, because my half sister, there's 12 years between us. We had the same dad, but different mothers. And I remember one Saturday sitting down, she was, I think, 15 or 16, and I was in my 20s at this point. And we're sitting down looking at family pictures from my life. And she sees my dad, being the dad, the quintessential father. And after we're all done, my dad was there looking at the pictures with us too. My dad had left, and it was just her and I. And she goes, "I don't know that man that you have in those pictures. That's not the same dad I had," because my dad, for her, left when she was 2. So I understand what you're saying. It's like your sister has a different version of who your father was. Right. So I understand that completely. And for you, it's a much different loss, because this is somebody you're from, but you don't understand fully who he was. Have you learned more about him since you're older now?
Way more. So my entire life, I've heard stories about John. And it's interesting because I'm actually the only one who really talks about how he died. Most people talk about how he lived. And I think that's a lesson for everybody, which is like people remember how you chose to live. They don't necessarily care how or even maybe when you die. I think that how we choose to live, I hear stories about John all the time. All the time. Growing up, I would hear all these stories. And from my understanding, he was extremely inspirational, extremely fun. Definitely sort of captured the room type of guy. They had to shut down a lot of Holden's a town that he grew up in when he did die, because apparently 400 plus 600 people, I don't know if it's 400 or 600, I've heard both, but it was a lot of people came to the funeral. And yeah, I think I've learned over the years about him, but from the perspective of many different people, all from the frame of like reminiscing on the beautiful parts. And I've gotten occasionally some of the between the lines of like different challenges and stuff. But for the most part, I think it's interesting. We have nostalgia when we look back. And so I think a lot of I've had to sort of read between the lines, yeah, to try to understand who he was and what he was, yeah.
I think it's interesting. I mean, usually when somebody passes, there is very much a revisionist history that is formed. People don't necessarily always look at the truth because they want to remember the good. And that's not a bad thing. But sometimes we do need to remember those people as they were, because it teaches us something.
Right.
And that being said, I remember when my stepmom passed, my grandmother, she was in the back of the car because it was after Katrina, and I had both my grandmothers in the car, and my dad's mom was in the car with us, sitting in the front, and she's going on. This was like my stepmother had been dead, I think, 2 weeks, and she is just saying nasty stuff about her. And I'm just sitting there going, I can't believe this. But then when my own mom died and I had my mom's ashes with me, she was belittling my mom. So it's very intriguing that normally you don't hear anybody speak ill of the dead. It's like an unspoken rule. But she had no compunction. She would just absolutely speak her mind. And it was scary at times, because it's like, how do you reconcile yourself for saying this stuff about somebody that just died?
Right.
So how old was your dad when he passed?
28.
And at 26, you had a very near-death car accident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In my speeches, I usually show the picture, and I've seen the pictures of my dad's car, and the pictures of my car don't look that different. It was definitely not a fender bender. It was a bad one. And physically we were okay. My cousin and I, my little cousin, he was 17. I was 26 at the time. But mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, that rattled me so much because it's not like, that could have been it. It's like, no, like my whole life was from the frame of like, that could have been it, because I live, my dad at 28, that's very young, statistically speaking, to pass away. And so, yeah, that rattled me so much, and I changed everything after that.
I used to deal with a lot of car accidents, and hearing some of the horrific stories about the accidents, it would shake me, because it makes you look at life in a different perspective. So the day of the accident, was it something that, and I don't want to say anything about liability, because I know there's issues with liability and everything. So I don't want to say anything about that. And you didn't say that liability was an issue, but was there something that you could have done differently to have avoided that accident?
Yeah. So it was 2015, and it was a really bad winter. We were up in New England, New Hampshire, and the signs were covered by the snowbanks. And so I was supposed to yield. The car accident was my fault, 100%. I was supposed to yield and didn't. I thought the road stayed right. It actually was left, and I ended up on the wrong side of the road. Fortunately, no one was hurt. The truck that I hit, I thought it was a Mack truck. That's what really rattled me, is I thought for sure this was the end, because I thought it was a Mack truck. It ended up being a very lift kitted, just pickup truck. And fortunately, my car was a 2004 Volkswagen Passat. It was I used to call it the tank, German engineered steel trap of a car, just a really heavy, heavy, safe car, luckily, and both airbags did go off, so we were okay. But emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, though, I was definitely rattled big time.
Yeah, it's something like that when you see I don't want to say your life flash before your eyes, but in a way you do, it makes you take stock. And there's a way, when you're talking about winter, I understand our winters never get that bad where I'm at. I'm in Illinois. I've never seen snow that high. We've had it. I've just never been here. And hopefully this is not the year that we have that, but I live out in farm country now, and I won't drive at a certain point because the farm fields will have snow blown across and the road's impassable. So what do? You at a certain point, living where we do in the winter, you get confident. You say, okay, I'm fine. I got a 4-wheel drive car. I can make it through. And you proceed through. Had anything, let me ask you this, was there anything in your core that told you maybe you shouldn't make this trip that day? Or was it just you weren't paying that much attention?
I don't think I was paying that much attention in terms of like, in hindsight, what is obvious to me is that I was unfulfilled. I'm writing a book right now called Optimizing for Fulfillment. And I've got this pyramid of fulfillment that I take my clients through, and it's sort of like a diagnostic. So it's sort of like, okay, well, the foundation, there's 5 levels to it. And the first level is physical needs. So like shelter, food, sleep, hydration, training, exercise, that kind of thing. Then the next level is physical, mental, and emotional needs. Then the level 3 is mostly emotional and mental needs. And then level 4 and level 5 are spiritual needs. And it's obvious to me now that when you say, like, should you have not taken that trip that day? In general, I was living outside of alignment. And for me, alignment, to make this practical, is you have core aspirations, which are your goals and dreams and your vision for your future. You have core values, which is the way in which you show up today. And then you have your core beliefs, which is like mostly conditioning from your past most of the time. And so you've got your past, your present, and your future. And I think we're all 3 simultaneously. And without getting too esoteric, I was living outside of alignment on autopilot for sure. And I think that, so like, no, there wasn't like any, like, you shouldn't go on this trip to TGI Fridays up in New Hampshire with your little cousin. But when I look back and reflect, I can see clearly now that in general, even just being in New Hampshire was somewhat outside of alignment. It was just like playing Call of Duty with my 17-year-old little cousin. Nothing against him, nothing against that. It wasn't in alignment. And I wasn't very discerning with my time back then, as much as I am now anyways. I think I can see clearly now that I was living on autopilot. And one more thing I'll say as well is we all have a certain paradigm that we make our decisions by. And if you've read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about how some people have a work-centered paradigm and some people have a church-centered paradigm. Some people have a family-centered paradigm. I think the most common paradigm is pleasure-centered, which it's a deep belief that life is about fun. And I grew up in that for sure. I grew up in a pleasure-centered paradigm. And to be honest, reflecting on my father's life, he had a pleasure-centered paradigm as well, which makes sense. That's why he and my mom got together. And I now want to have a fulfillment-centered paradigm, a mission-centered paradigm, a principle-centered paradigm, a paradigm that isn't chasing pleasure at the expense of fulfillment. And so, yes, I was outside of alignment in general, but no, there wasn't anything particular about that one trip to TGI Fridays that, like, I was like, oh, this is wrong or whatever.
Just the reason I ask is sometimes you just know. I mean, sometimes it's like that's when I was going to go on the first day with my ex-husband, my first husband. I remember that day, there were so many things that came up and I kept, my intuition was basically kind of telling me, you don't want to do this. And I tried getting out of it, but yet I still ended up doing it. I still acquiesced. So it's like, sometimes we second guess ourselves. That's why I was asking, because, sometimes it's right there in our face that, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this, but you do it anyway.
Yeah.
And something you're talking about, the pleasure thing and time wasting. I mean, we have very much now a society that we have set up where we can waste time easily. And it's not that it's an intentional thing, but somebody jumps on TikTok to see something and then you're stuck scrolling. And I don't do that very often because it's like, I see the addiction there. there is an addiction. And I know somebody will be like, oh no, it's not but isn't it? If you can't put the phone down because you want to see all the content, you'd be there all day, every day. Same thing with Facebook, same thing with all social media. It's something that is a time suck.
100%.
But it's also part of life now. And as a business owner, as somebody that's trying to market their book, you have to put yourself into that position.
Right. I think that social media is a tool. And I think that the way in which you use that tool needs to be very proactive and very conscious. It's just like, I don't know, an axe can help you build a home or it can kill somebody. And I think that you're right. It's addicting. Social media is addicting for sure, especially for people who are on autopilot. It's very important to be intentional with what we do. One thing that I think is a valuable nugget that I can bring to the table. I remember when I learned this, changed my perspective forever. Certain little bits of data will change your perspective forever. So anyone listening, if you're blessed enough, so first of all, the average life expectancy on globally is 72 years right now. As of yesterday, I Googled it yesterday. 72 years old. That's a little higher if you're female. And so I looked this up yesterday and it got me thinking because we did a podcast on major causes of poor decision making was the title. Very popular topic. No. Right. And one of the major causes of poor decision making is short-term thinking. Because there's that whole YOLO thing. You only live once. It's like, well, you might as well go out tonight and have a blast. And, because, you only live once. It's like, well, statistically speaking, you're going to live to 72. So shouldn't you optimize for a fulfilling long-term life? Right. And it's that constant philosophical question of like, should I be living for today or should I be living for the long term? And so I think statistically, it's important for us all to think more long term than we're naturally wired to, because when we were hunter gatherers, we weren't set up really for long term. But what I will say to your listeners is this: if you're blessed enough to live 100 years on this planet, a centenarian, okay, that means you have 36,500 days on this planet. Okay, so 100 times 365. So 36,500 days on this planet, if you're blessed to live to 100, and that's rare. Okay, now, if you only had $36,500 and you could never make another dollar, how carefully would you spend that money? See, we're fritting away time on useless things, and I'm so passionate about this. Because I was guilty of that for sure prior to that car accident. That woke me up. I'll tell you what, I have not wasted much time since then. But before that, I was absolutely wasting tons and tons of time on things that, quite frankly, are not valuable uses of time. They're not fulfilling. And I think pleasure-centered paradigm is a big mistake. Angry Birds is fun. It's never going to fulfill you. Never. And thinking otherwise is just unintelligent.
Same thing with Candy Crush.
Yeah.
And here's something, to go back to piggyback onto the statement about life. I mean, my husband was, I think, 19 or 20 when he was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic. So he decided to get his act together, and he did. He lost 100 pounds. He got his act together. He was doing really well. And then one day says, hey, you want a donut? You can play with your insulin. Okay. So that sets him up to YOLO, live life to the fullest. He's going to embrace whatever he's going to embrace, and he's going to live life to the fullest. By the time I met my husband, he already had diabetes for over 20 years. He was starting to see the complications from it. And the reason I bring this up is because, so when he was 30, or before he hit 30, he was like, I'm not going to live to see 30. He had bought stuff for his apartment because he had a condo. He started selling stuff that he didn't need because, well, I'm never going to have a house. I'm never going to have this. He didn't see anything past the age of 30. Well, he hit past the age of 30. We meet and he tells me how he's going to die. I'm like, I'd rather love you and lose you than never to love you. Okay. So we end up deciding to pursue our relationship, and we had 16 years together. But during that 16 years, I heard him say, I don't know how many times, I used to have one of those, but I sold it because I didn't think I was going to be around. I used to do this, but I didn't think I was going to be around. And I think if you talk to a lot of people in the younger generation, that's where the YOLO thing comes from, is I get to live life now. I don't have to deal with it later. I'm not going to be around, so it doesn't matter. I don't have to plan for the future because I'm not going to be around. And the end of the story is, well, he had 16 more years with me. He ended up dying at 54. If he would have taken better care of himself when he was younger, he could have lived longer.
For sure.
But he wanted to enjoy life. And, at a certain point, as he got a little older, I will say it comes down to this: quantity over quality. Which do you want? If you're going to be miserable in your life, is the quantity of life worth it if the quality is not?
Right.
So, I mean, there's a fine balancing act. I understand completely what you're saying, and I agree. We can live our life to the fullest and still to appreciate every moment we have. But once you know that, dare I say, like the doctor saying to us, you're on borrowed time. Do you try to eke out as much time as possible and be miserable, or do you go ahead and embrace whatever you want?
That's a philosophical discussion, and I think it all depends on what's going to fulfill you most.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I think of two words. I think of fulfillment and I think of regret. I think those two are the best teachers. After you do something, so my girlfriend and I, we have an experience review that we do. So like, let's say we went to dinner with her family. After it, on the ride home, we'd do, okay, quick experience review. What was that like for you? What did we learn? How fulfilling was that from 0 to 10? And why do we do that? So that we can be more discerning in the future. We want to do more of the 10 out of 10, more quality. And if it was a 2 out of 10, we would, okay, what can we do to get it closer to 10 next time? Or should we not do that anymore? Right? Again, not dinner with her family. Her family's great. But like, that's my point, is like, I'm 33 years old, about to be 33 on November 17th. And which is 231 in doggy years, by the way. I said that at a speech once, and for some reason, only one person laughed. But it is what it is. Terrible joke. But I reread the book of my life, and that's what it comes down to, is like, we don't start out in life and go like, oh, I know who I am. No. So we go out and we explore. We try new persons, places, things, and ideas, and then we get more and more discerning as we get older because we value our time more and more and more. And I think that's an important part of evolution. If I was still living like I was 16, I'd only have 16 level fulfillment. And I wouldn't be making intelligent choices, at least not compared to what I'm doing now. And what I mean by an intelligent choice is what choice is going to maximize the probability, statistically speaking, of the most fulfillment and the highest quality of life possible. What is the quality of your life? 0 to 10. If it's an 8, great. What's going to get it closer to 10? Probably more positive choices. Now the second word is regret. Okay. I've never met anyone who said, I really wish I had read less books. I've never heard that. You're never going to hear that. Oh, I really wish I had exercised less. No one says that. I really wish I hadn't eaten so healthy. No one says that. The point is that there are positive choices in this world that are universal. Virtue and vice are universal. It's a universal language. Compassion is always going to be a virtue. Okay? Hard work and work ethic is almost always a virtue. Yes, you can take it to really, really, really sincere extremes, like your cat is doing right now. No worries. But vice, right? You do hear people say, I wish I hadn't drank so much alcohol. For me, I wish I hadn't drank so much. Genuinely, I poisoned my mind more than I should have. I have a very blessed mind, and I should have taken better care of it. That doesn't mean I live in regret all the time. It just means, guess what? I make more intelligent choices now. Now I'm 3 years sober. So I think your relationship with fulfillment and your relationship with regret, and I'll end on this in terms of this part. Fulfillment, I believe, is the soul's recognition of alignment with its highest self. Regret, I believe, is the soul's recognition of misalignment. So at 26, when I was filled with regret, it was my recognition, my soul's recognition of like, you've been misaligned, man. It's time for you to go back to the drawing board. You got to recontemplate your life and redesign it based on what you're here for. Living in your calling and having the highest quality of life possible while we are here is what's most important, I believe.
What do you think about somebody that says that they have no regrets? Do you believe them?
No. I think that's shallow thinking. I think their ego wants to tell them that. I think someone who has no regrets is someone who's not honest with themselves about the improvement process. And or what I will say is this: if you're happy where you are and you're fulfilled where you are, you'll be thankful for where you've been because it's what brought you here. But don't tell yourself the story that you couldn't have made more intelligent choices. That's just, of course you could have, right? We could have read more books. We could have been more intelligent. We could have tried harder in school. Like, I think we kind of let ourselves off the hook when we say, oh, no regrets. Like, and I do know some people who live that way. And I'm telling you, it's a reckless way to live. There's nothing more beautiful and showing of humility than saying, you know what, honestly, like, I made some poor choices there, and that's okay. I'm not going to beat myself up and live in shame and guilt and remorse, but I'm smarter now. I'm going to make some more intelligent, positive, aligned choices because I want to improve the quality of my life and the quality of life around those around me. And one last thing I'll say too on this whole idea of being selfish, right? It's like, what is best for me if I'm a virtuous, positively influential man is what's best for others. What if what's best for me is what's best for the world? See, hurt people hurt other people. And I've been on the other end of that. I'll tell you what, I grew up in adversity for sure. And anyone who knows, my father passed away when I was 2, like, that created trauma, that created pain, that created vices, that created escapes. It was a very challenging childhood for many, many reasons. And I won't get into the depths of that. And I had many blessings too. But hurt people do hurt people. And if you're not making positive, intelligent choices and learning from your mistakes and owning them and taking responsibility and being virtuous, you will hurt others unintentionally. When I was the most outside of alignment, that's when I unintentionally hurt other people. And now I don't hurt other people. Very little. I don't want to say never. Of course, I'm not always perfect. But I'm much less unkind than I used to be. And I think that's a byproduct of my own alignment and my own ability to learn and grow in alignment with what I now understand. And I'll end on this point. John Maxwell, he has this really funny quote that I love. He says, people think wisdom comes with age. He said, no. Sometimes age comes alone. Okay. And that's a fact. I know some people that are 60 and they are very unwise. And I know someone, my girlfriend, she's 27 years old. She is not only brilliant, but she is wise. She knows, she has higher awareness genuinely than most 50-year-olds. And I'm not just saying that because the quality and the contemplation and the philosophy and the education and the constant and consistent, persistent pursuit of her own potential is so high, and I just think that all of us, as long as we're doing our best, that's great. But more importantly, you need to better your best. And that's my belief. And again, this is just my beliefs, but I was always doing my best. What I wasn't always doing was bettering my best. And bettering your best is what I think matters more than anything else.
I think, going back to something popped in my head when we were talking, or you were talking about regrets, the fact is, I think Frank Sinatra said it best, regrets, I have a few, but I did it my way.
Yeah.
At least in that song, you're owning up that, yeah, I do have regrets, but I also did things I wanted to do the way I wanted it to.
Yeah.
And I think that's better than saying I have no regrets.
Right. Much better.
So you alluded to the fact that I know up here, when I was looking through your bio, you had talked about drinking and partying. Were you sober at the time of your accident?
Yes. Yeah, believe it or not. Yeah. Which I'm really grateful for. Yeah.
I was going to say it's a blessing in itself. Yes. So was it just dealing with the trauma that you had in your childhood that you were trying to hide from that just grew and grew and grew, and you decided, well, let me self-medicate by partying and feeling good and that pleasure sensor?
I appreciate the question. It's digging deep. So full transparency here, full vulnerability. I, without a question, in hindsight, again, I can see clearly now. One of my favorite authors wrote a book called I Can See Clearly Now, and he reflected on his life. So I didn't know this at the time, but now looking back and sort of rereading the book of my life because I'm writing mine. The first chapter of my book is called Dear Reader. The second chapter is Where It All Began. And so lately I've been doing a lot of reflecting. And it's clearly, I can see clearly now that yes, I was honestly, I believe I was drinking. And this might sound egotistical. I don't even care. I really don't. I think I was trying to dumb myself down so that I could be more normal, so I could fit in. Ever since I was very young, I always felt different. And I don't mean different in the sense of like nobody gets me type of thing. I mean more like statistically speaking. I grew up in a very small town, and it's a small-minded town. It is. And I never had that. I was always dreaming super big. I mean, from a very young age, I wanted to be the CEO of a Fortune 50 tech company. And Steve Jobs was my hero. I've got, quotes behind me. And only those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And I've always been that way, even as a little boy. I've always been that aspirational pain in the ass who just always wanted to strive. I don't care if it was snowboarding or video games. I did everything I possibly could to be the very best I could be at everything I do. And that is a common thread through my whole life. I think some of it was to escape pain and trauma for sure. I think more of it was to try to fit in. I think that when I drank, I shut off that future-oriented aspirational part of me. And it was quite frankly, I mean, like if I had been drinking before this interview, like it would be a much more fun interview. You know what I mean? It would be very like playful and funny and fun. It wouldn't be nearly as aspirational and intense, I think. And so I think I was shutting off the part of me that makes me different, but I was also, while doing that, shutting off the part of me that makes me great. And after 26, I stopped. It took me 5 years to quit drinking. I had I fell off a couple times. Weddings in particular were my kryptonite, but now I'm 3 years sober, which is really cool.
You have to, I applaud you for taking up the mantle of sobriety, because I know it's not an easy thing. It's not something that everybody can handle. My dad through the years has been a functioning alcoholic. He could quit cold turkey, which not everybody can do. And I understand that. He's been able to quit cold turkey and he doesn't even drink really now.
Nice.
But that took a lot out of him. And he was the good time boy. He, after my parents split, that's what he did. His shop was actually called, his garage and social club. And so his customers would come and pick up their car and then bring alcohol. This is New Orleans, so that was the norm.
Yeah.
But so he was happy with that life. And it was funny because we had a conversation this weekend and he, via text, and he said something along the lines of, he wouldn't, if he had the chance, he would do it all over again.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Because he enjoyed his life. And part of me, there's been a long process of going, I wish he would have been the dad he was before they split. But he wasn't. And now after hearing him or reading what he said, it's kind of like, I have to accept him for who he is. He lived his life the way he wanted to. And he shares your birthday, by the way. But,
really?
Yeah, not that you needed to know that, but yeah.
Cool. So he's also 231 in doggy years. I'm kidding.
But it's just one of those things where it's like, you have to come to a point where either the people that are in your life are going to accept your sobriety or they're not, or they're going to accept your drinking or they're not. So you have to make your choice. And I think that's why being sober is a big thing, is you have to make that choice for you. You can't do it for anybody else. Right. And I think that's where a lot of people are like, oh, we need to do an intervention. If the person is not on board, it's not going to work.
Right.
So I applaud you with being able to take control of your life.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. And I think at the end of the day, everybody needs to make the choice that they believe is best for them. And that's the only question is this a fulfilling choice? Am I living a fulfilling life? And if we ask that question, I think that will help us really understand, because I think pleasure, I mean, donuts are pleasurable. Candy Crush is pleasurable. Like watching Netflix all day is pleasurable, but it's never fulfilling. And we all know that inherently. There's a neuroscientist named Stephen Kotler. He wrote this book behind me, and we interviewed him on the podcast. And he says, Alan, playing small is actually bad for us from a biological perspective. And he broke down the science of why that is. And I've always believed that, but now I've got the actual scientific evidence. Like when we play small, we don't have to grow. We don't have to learn. We don't have to work on ourselves. We don't have to look at our blind spots. We don't have to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. It's work, living in harmony with our true nature, I think, and living in our calling of trying to maximize our own unique potential and help others do the same, and to have the greatest level of contribution we can have. It's a fulfilling life. But again, it comes down to that fulfillment pyramid I told you about. There's levels. If your physical needs aren't met, you're not going to be worried about how much can I contribute. It's a hierarchy that needs to be consistently and sustainably sort of worked on. And so thank you for that. I appreciate it. I think that admitting and taking ownership for the fact that, like, it's interesting because no one else really thought I had a drinking problem. Like no one else was like, oh, Alan, you're an alcoholic. Like that was never really a thing. But for me, I just kind of knew, like, this is something that is not improving the overall quality of my life. And you get that, again, intuition you mentioned earlier. The intuition was like, you really should stop this. Like, well, yeah, I'm not really hurting anyone. And like, I'm a lot of fun. And, I don't drink that much. Your intuition wants you to stop. Just trust that. Have faith in that. And yeah, I screwed up. I'm human, but I am more fulfilled now. I definitely am. Now, am I less fun? For sure. It is what it is. It is what it is. I used to be a lot more fun. But again, it depends what you consider fun, right? So I think that everyone should make their own choice, though. That I do agree with 100%. I remember someone asked me my political views once, and I said, my political view is always whichever one takes away less freedom.
I mean, the political views are something, same thing with religious views. It's like, that's something that you get into a very toxic area now. I hate to say it, because everything is so angsty with it. So it's like, you kind of just step back if you can. At least I do, because it's like, I don't want to, there's enough drama in the world that I don't necessarily want to engage in that. So have you been to any weddings since your sobriety?
Yes. Okay. Yes, I have. One was in Newport. There was 2 weddings in particular where I told myself I would not drink, and then I ended up drinking. And I had a blast, but like I always regretted it when I was hungover the next day. One of them I was puking outside my car, and I was just like, okay, never again. But since then I've been to several, and I didn't drink, which was really cool. Yeah. So
the one thing you were talking about, pleasure, or living a fulfilled life, I think, and it goes back to just what I was saying a minute ago about the political and the religious atmosphere we have, and it brings in social media, because it has created, and even the regular media, we have created such a toxic fear environment in our world that's constantly being hammered at. How do, and the person that's trying to just survive, how do they get, I know what I do to take care of me, but for a lot of people, they're not going to see that positive thing, because all they hear is the news. All they hear is the toxic stuff. They hear what allegedly is going on here and what allegedly is going on there. And my religion says this. I'm watching right now a special on a certain religion, which I'm not going to name because I don't want to get in trouble and have them start coming after me. But I started watching the documentary on Netflix, and it's like, there's mind control, and there's so many things that can be played out in your mind, but even fear, constantly being put in front of you, can mess with your mind.
For sure.
So how do you recommend people stepping back from that?
Yeah. So I recommend everyone creates a give up list, and this is extreme and hardcore, but this is the frame. Okay. Inputs and outputs. If you want to live a rich, dynamic, powerful, positive, meaningful life, a fulfilling life, and you're watching mass media all the time, that's like trying to make a cake with cement. Okay, it's not going to work. Inputs and outputs. If there's junk in, there's going to be junk out. No matter what, it's cyclical, right? It's yin and yang. It's in and out. It's like, so you got to try to create. So I was reading a book last night, actually this morning at 5 a.m. It's still dark, so I thought it was last night. But that's an input. Stephen Kotler's book on the art of impossible, I'm learning about all these amazing things. Like, that's positive input. If I'm watching the news versus doing that, who's going to have a more positive outlook on life? Who's going to be more effective and capable in their day-to-day life? And so, even movies that you watch, right? I mean, for me, I don't watch horror movies. And the reason why is because I don't need to train my amygdala to get scared more often. I don't need to wake up with nightmares about, people fabricating murders and stuff. I think having a positive life is directly correlated to having positive influences, not just in the people you spend time with, but in the information you take in. If you want to make a chocolate cake, you need certain ingredients. If you want a rich, dynamic, positive life, you need certain ingredients. I recommend books. I recommend, positive, influential podcasts. I recommend, people who are uplifting and positive. That doesn't mean you have toxic positivity. Like, there are problems in the world, and we need to look at those and be aware of them and solve them. But it needs to be productive. Yeah, productive. It needs to be like, I'll give a tangible example that a lot of people might have a problem with, but I think it's powerful for anyone who really thinks about it. So you're in Illinois, and so we're both in the same country. So let's say you invest, I don't know, 10 hours a week during the political campaign to watch everything that's going on. And then you have one vote. So, like, your mathematical difference that you can make is 1 in whatever, 100 million. It's not that, but it's very minuscule in comparison to the time you invested. See, I would rather invest those 10 hours a week trying to make a positive difference in my own community rather than trying to rely on the president to do something that my one vote, right? So it's just important to allocate your time and your energy and your attention in ways that you believe are actually positive. And like you said, you try to refrain from some of this drama and toxicity. It's important, right? If you plant a redwood in toxic soil, it's not gonna grow. But if you plant a redwood in really, really, rich, dynamic soil, and sunshine and rain, I mean, that redwood can grow 200 feet tall. And I think all of us are redwoods, deep down. And I think maybe a lot of us are planted in this tiny little pot, with toxic soil. And I think we got to get out of that. I know I had to. I don't watch any news. I know some people will disagree with that, but I have this sort of mentality of I'm here to maximize my potential and help others do the same. And I'm going to do my part. And the way in which I do that is reading amazing books. I was reading Will Durant's book on the greatest minds and ideas in history. He wrote a book about, Plato and all the different philosophers. And if I feed my mind, now I can be more valuable here, which then ripples into your life, which then you impact more people, and then those people impact more people. And so I try really hard to be the change that I want to see in the world, the Mahatma Gandhi quote. And we're all doing our best at that. But one of the pieces is to just really dial down the noise. I mean, just because it's going on in the world doesn't mean it has to be your world. And I'll give you one tiny more example. So remember at the beginning of COVID when everyone's just buying toilet paper? Mm-hmm. That's just irrational decision making. It's a cognitive bias called social proof. When you see enough people doing it, you assume that's the right way, and then it spreads. There's something called memes on the internet. And what people don't know is that memetics is an actual scientific term for a mind virus. And a mind virus is something that, we're all afraid to get COVID, right? We should be afraid to get mind viruses. We should be afraid to get inaccurate thinking. We should be afraid to be injected with fear constantly. You see a car accident on the side of the road, everyone stops to look. There's a beautiful rainbow and sunset, and everybody's just flying by, right? So it's human nature. to be focused on fear because that was for survival, but we really have to override that, especially nowadays when there's so much of this stuff going on.
Well, and at a certain point when CNN came to pass, the news became infotainment. It was no longer just the news, it was infotainment. I mean, the way it's being presented. And you used to not have, there was a law that said they couldn't be biased. And now you have so much media bias that's going to print a story or plant a story that's going to try to sway one side to the other. And all that does is create enemies of people for no reason. It creates civil unrest. And why do you want people so against each other?
Right.
And I want to go back to, you were talking about, the other thing is like the big push now, there's a big controversy about having breastfeeding. People should not breastfeed in public. But hey, I want to watch that true crime podcast or listen to the true crime podcast. And I want to watch all the violence on TV and the blood and the gore. But seeing a woman with breastfeeding her baby, that's just wrong.
Right.
One's natural. Why are you? I've listened to, there's one on Facebook that I have watched on occasion. She does makeup and talks about true crime. But the fact is, you sit there and wonder is, why is these things so popular? And are we teaching other people how to commit crime?
Right.
Which sounds really, really ridiculous. And the last thing I want to say about what you were saying about political, if we took the money that was spent on political ads and actually put them back into the community,
right,
your candidates would have word of mouth, because people would talk about what the candidate did, and it wouldn't be so toxic, poisonous commercials that are just slamming and not really doing anything else.
I know. 100%.
It would be a positive thing.
I know.
So you have a course, correct?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your course.
So the course is called What It Really Takes to Get to the Next Level. And I remember I was on a podcast, this had to be 3 months ago, I think. And they asked me, what does it mean to be next level? And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, interesting. I've never been asked that before, which was surprising to me. And I said, it's who are you and what are you doing when no one's watching? That's the best way I can describe it. Like, I'm going to be at the gym later this evening. Hopefully my girlfriend will come with me. I don't know if she will or not yet because we haven't scheduled. And I'm going to put more conscious effort into me being effective at the gym and kind and loving to her than I did maybe even on this podcast. I think that don't get caught up with all the stuff out here. Try to focus on improving as a human being. We have a saying called character over everything. See, if I give a speech in front of 1,000 people, I have 1,000 different reputations because I have 1,000 different perspectives on whether or not they like me or don't like me, or he said that arrogant or this, whatever. I only have one character. Character is who I am really, who I actually am when no one's watching. That's what it means to be next level. So this course is basically, it's based on these 5 C's we created. There's technically a 6th C, which I'll just give the bonus. So clarity is the first one. Crystal clear on who you are, who you aspire to be, who you used to be, and alignment with that. Number 2 is commitment. How committed are you to becoming who you aspire to be? 3 is confidence. How do you build confidence? Can it be built? How do you do it? 4 is consistency. Consistency is so challenging for human beings, especially positive habits, because the rewards usually come way later. And then community. We've talked a lot about community here. Like community, do you have positive, influential, rich, dynamic relationships with people around you? And then the last one, the 6th one, and the bonus one is choices. The last C is choices, because without that, none of these other ones work. And so that's what the course is about. And I'm really, really proud of it. There's 5 modules, 6 and a bonus module for each of the C's. And it's a self-assessment too, 0 to 10. How clear am I? 0 to 10, how confident am I? 0 to 10, how committed am I? That kind of thing. And then you figure, okay, here's where I am. Now here's where I want to go. How do we get a little closer to 10? This isn't like an extreme makeover. You're going to suddenly revolutionize your life in 30 days. None of that. It's just, this is what matters. Let's focus on what matters and let's get you more towards a fulfilling life and whatever that means to you. And that's what the course is designed to do.
Do you think very much like with your sobriety, it's a daily struggle to maintain this?
Always. So I don't know if struggle's the right word, but yeah. So I'll end on this. There's three parts of each of us, in my opinion, and I've already kind of alluded to that. There's who you used to be, there's who you are now, and there's who you aspire to be. And I'm the one who cares more about who you aspire to be. Who you used to be and who you are now is only interesting to me, to try to help you become who you aspire to be. Because if you're headed from Boston to LA and you end up in Wyoming, it's because you're headed to LA. And so we're all a byproduct of the future self we're trying to embody. And in a weird way, we never really get there. Life is about the journey, yes, but the destination you choose in advance dictates the journey. From Boston to Worcester is an hour-long trip. I've done it many times. From Boston to LA, I also did it. Very different journey. So life is about the journey, but if you don't choose a destination in advance, the journey is not going to be epic, and it's not going to force you to meet people and face your fears and challenge and grow and all that stuff. So yes, it's a daily struggle. And the daily struggle is there's three wolves. There's the wolf that you used to be, aka your past conditioning and limiting beliefs, born limitless, taught to be limited type of thing. Then there's the pleasure-centered wolf at the now. That we wake up in the morning and we want that Sunday morning donuts and coffee, like the pleasure-centered now wolf. And then there's the aspirational wolf. This wolf represents your highest self, your greatest potential, your greatest level of positive impact. The fulfilling wolf. Which wolf you feed most often with what you say, think, do, feel, and believe is the wolf that will win the fight every single day. And to pretend otherwise is just not. It's just not. And that's why true crime is so popular, because that's a pleasure wolf. That's a pleasure wolf. I don't listen to true crime, but I always ask people, do you listen to podcasts? And they're like, yeah. Oh my God, I love that true crime. In my head, it's like, why does everyone love this freaking podcast? I don't even know what it's about, but I would much rather watch Hardcore History by Dan Carlin or something like that, where it's like I'm getting real value of actual history. And so anyways, that I want to feed the fulfillment wolf, the aspirational wolf. I don't want to feed the pleasure-centered wolf or the limited past nostalgic wolf that, wants you to stay small. And the reason why, and maybe this is an overcorrection, but most of the world is already feeding those other wolves. I don't want to feed those other wolves because they're already fat. They're already overfed. The aspirational wolf is the one we need to feed, in my opinion. So,
and I'm going to say this: I'm not knocking anybody who likes true crime podcasts. I'm not knocking that at all.
Same.
Maybe it's about the fact that you can't believe somebody actually had the gall or the ability to do it. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. But I watch Law and Order, so I really can't say anything now, can I?
Right.
So anyway, is there anything you want to add?
The last thing I would add is just the best lesson I've ever gotten was aim high and you'll have choices. And that's my hope for everybody. No matter how hard your past has been, you have a spotless future just like me. And if you take responsibility for your choices, your life will statistically speaking and probability speaking, when you make positive choices, you have a higher chance of a higher quality of life, which will ripple into the rest of the world. So take on that responsibility, take on that challenge. It's a daily challenge, but those days turns into weeks, turns into months, turn into quarters, years, decades. And at 26, I started making positive choices and I started learning from those and I started making even more positive choices. And I'm telling you, people told me when I was in high school, these are the best years of your life. That is absolute BS. High school was really hard for me. Not academically, but like in terms of like family and all that kind of stuff. No, life will improve when you improve. And my life keeps getting better and better and better, but I know that's because I keep getting better and I keep trying at least to make more positive choices. So yes, bad things happen to us all. Tragedies and adversities, they happen. But it's what you do with them and it's the choices you make to be more grateful, to be more compassionate, to be more loving, to be more hardworking, to be more virtuous. Virtue and vice are universal languages. So make the choice for virtue and you have a virtuous, meaningful life. And the very last thing I'll say is this: I don't wish for anyone to have an easy life. I wish for them to have a challenging, growth-oriented, deeply meaningful life. I think having a deeply meaningful life is much more valuable and fulfilling than having an easy life. And I think when we stop trying to play for the easy life, that's when we really start to understand what life's about. At least that's what is true for me.
I think I've had people tell me, well, you made it through all that stuff. I can't believe you survived all the stuff you've been through in your life. And it's just like, when you're going through it, you don't see it. You just live it. You experience it and you go. And the other thing I will piggyback on to something you said about high school. Why we glamorize high school, I have no idea. And, I've never been to a class reunion, and I don't really keep in touch with anybody I went to high school with. And I know that's strange for some, but it's like, high school was high school. It's not the end all be all of your life, but yet we paint it out to be that way.
Yep.
And there's no real reason for it, because life gets better after that. You have more experiences after that. The only thing that was good about it is, well, I was younger.
Yeah. Literally. That's it.
I had more energy and I was younger. And I had no responsibilities really. So that's about it. Yeah. Maybe that's the factor. It's the no responsibility factor.
Yeah. But I like responsibility. Maybe I'm weird. I think taking responsibility is important.
As an insurance adjuster, the very first claim that ever came across my desk was a parking lot accident in Missouri. And our insured backed into somebody, and it had been snowy. He didn't clean his window off. And he argued with me that it was not his fault. Now, I just painted a picture out to you that this guy's got snow in the back window. So obviously he didn't look out his back window. He's backing out of a parking space to the person that's got the right of way. How is this not his fault?
Yep.
He wanted to talk to my manager because I said it was his fault. That taught me, and that's the only reason I'm bringing this up, that taught me that in most cases, most people do not want to take responsibility for their actions.
Yeah. Which is very, very sad, because if they did take responsibility for their actions and their choices, they would have a much more meaningful, positive life, in my opinion.
And you don't get to play victim.
Exactly.
So, well, Alan, I thank you for your time, and I have enjoyed our conversation.
I have as well. Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
So Alan's story was pretty amazing. It was interesting. And, we talked about the fact after we got off air. And he said he learned some things about himself. And I think that's one thing about the podcast is while we're digging deep, you end up finding out things not only about yourself, but people around you sometimes. So it's important. I mean, one thing I've learned during all these episodes is I've learned to look at things differently, that maybe, sometimes what we've learned about our past and our ideas needs to be expanded. And that maybe other people's expectations, don't always get met. And in this case, learn to not waste time, appreciate time. Time is a gift. And try to figure out how to maximize what you want to do with your life. Create the life you want. And if you can take little bits from each episode and things from this episode and apply them to your life and create a life that you're proud of and you're happy with, then that's what matters. And then, maybe the Better To podcast actually has helped you out somewhat. So I thank you for tuning in as always. And like I said, if you want to be on the show, drop me an email at donna@thebettertopodcast.com. You can find all the social media links at bettertopodcast.com. And anyway, I'll catch you next time. Bye, guys. You are listening to the Better To podcast with DM Needom.